Hey everyone and welcome. My name is Keith Miller. This is the Quick Start Guide to IFS in 30 minutes. And what I'm going to show you today is how to get acquainted with Internal Family Systems Therapy, IFS. In fact, it's one of the most in-demand therapies that's out there today. I'm going to share with you in 30 minutes how to get started with the basics. I'm going to really cover a crash course of start to finish what IFS is and how it works. And by the way, I'm going to give you access to all of my slides here if you stay to the very end. Plus, I'll give you a free bonus PDF, something called the Using IFS with Direct and Indirect Access cheat sheet. So hang in there, hang tight through the very end of this whole presentation, the whole live stream, and you'll get access to these two really valuable resources. Okay, let me just say something real quick about me. I've been using IFS for more than 12 years. I fell in love with it probably way before that. I was using voice dialogue. And so I live in Maryland. I run a private therapy practice. I'm level 3 trained. I was certified and at the very beginning, and long story, getting certified again. and I've also been trained in advanced IFIO training, intimacy from the inside out. That's IFS for couples therapy. So I've done both of those trainings. I've spoken about IFS and neurobiology through PESI trainings as a national speaker there. I'm also the host of the Soul of Life podcast. You can hear me interview a lot of IFS teachers and trainers, including Dick Schwartz and other people, Bessel van der Kolk and Dan Siegel. I'm the author of 3 books, including Mindful Marriage, which I'll talk about at the very end here, which is an IFS and mindfulness course for couples. So that's just a little bit about me. IFS stands for Internal Family Systems Therapy, and it was created by Dr. Richard Schwartz in the 80s. And in the last 5 years, it's been known as the most in-demand premier type of evidence-based intervention for trauma, treatment of depression, all the side effects of trauma, physical pain, associated conditions that people might not always think of as treatable with talk therapy. Well, IFS is no ordinary talk therapy. All right, so let's dive in here. What is IFS? Well, first of all, it's unfortunately named. What do I mean by that? Well, IFS has nothing to do with family or family therapy. So why is it called Internal Family Systems Therapy? Well, the family systems part of the name comes from the overlap that IFS has with family therapy interventions. So you can picture family, for example, in which everyone's talking at the same time, and the therapist maybe intervenes and says, look, you can't all talk at the same time. Only one person can talk. So each person gets a chance to be heard. And with this kind of leadership, the group no longer reacts so much to each other, but every person can focus on the role that they play. Everybody has subpersonalities, and IFS calls this natural multiplicity. And by learning to notice and explore these distinct aspects of you, what IFS calls parts, you can expand your ability to lead, just like that therapist doing family therapy, but you're doing it within yourself, kind of like an orchestra conductor. You can create balance and linkages between parts that might be very different and doing opposite things, but they can harmonize together. This is called self-leadership. The end result is self-regulation and emotional balance. But unlike other modes of therapy, the primary instrument of change is not regulation at all. It's something we call constraint releasing. Let me just mention what makes IFS so revolutionary, right? Because it's a radical idea that everyone has an undamaged self that knows how to heal. That's what IFS teaches. Everyone has an undamaged self that knows how to heal. This idea that self can heal damaged parts of us, that there's an undamaged side to us, which we may call soul, right, or self, and it can heal the parts of us that get constrained or injured or bent out of shape by stress in the world. The plasticity that IFS can unlock is pretty impressive. And one of the reasons, and Dick Schwartz talks about this, is that self is a spiritual resource that many other traditions call by other names. And it's something that, is not something that we've invented here, and it's not new just because IFS has a system that describes it. What IFS is a methodical way of kind of operationalizing a spiritual approach. But the spiritual stuff has been around for a long time. Other traditions may call that self, the core self, the soul, or the aware ego, perhaps. Or in mindfulness, it's called big mind. And in traditional psychology, it's perhaps thought of as executive function or flow. And one way to get to know self is by its ability to be at one with what's happening. Whereas parts of you, parts of your personality, are clearly defined. They are kind of what Dan Siegel talks about, is like being nouns in a noun-like world. Whereas our self is kind of a quantum state. It's really not definable. It's the potential to be energy that flows in formation in certain directions, and that's what we call parts. When our energy is moving in a certain direction, it takes on a definition, and it has an agenda. That's a part. And we talk about this concept in IFS called self-energy, and that can be thought of as the absence of parts. But self-energy is greater than the sum of the parts. Now, that can be a little interesting, right? So it's the absence of parts, yet it's greater than the sum of the parts. If you're familiar with Gestalt theory, this will start to sound familiar. Or again, many mystical traditions will have language that's like this. When I talked to Dan Siegel, in fact, in my podcast, The Soul of Life, he said that Buddhist traditions and mindfulness traditions might call this a state of emptiness that is full. Right? So let me just repeat that. Self-energy can be thought of as the absence of parts, yet is greater than the sum of the parts. It's an emptiness and it's a fullness at the same time, right? So that can be a little bit of wavy gravy stuff. Self is the whole, right? IFS teaches that self has 8 basic qualities. I'm going to get into that right now so you can understand that and take some notes. IFS teaches these 8 qualities, the 8 C's, conveniently named if you're writing a book like Dick Schwartz, but here they are: calmness, curiosity, compassion, confidence, courage, clarity, connectedness, and creativity. Many people experience self as a kind of lighthearted state of well-being. And it's like what they say, it's who I really am. It's who I am. And I don't know about you, but I really enjoy this idea and think of it as the most brilliant part and the most magical part of IFS, right? That it's about helping people reconnect or recollect who they really are. I just love that. And it's a systematized way of doing it. I think unlike anything else out there, it has a modality, it has a flow to it, and a mindfulness or even hypnotic, I would say, quality, which can be very effective. Now, when we identify and we get to know and separate our awareness from the parts of us that are automated, that run our daily lives, right? The noun sense of our essence, when we can separate from that certainty, we call this unblending from a part in IFS, unblending. And unblending from our parts opens up a wider perspective in your mind. And in the brain, it can release soothing parasympathetic activation in your nervous system. That's the relaxation response. Now, next I'm going to talk more about parts and the 3 roles that parts take on in our inner system. Because just like in families and in groups, the parts of you and me, the parts that compose my mind and my personality, those parts perform jobs. And we could call them roles, and to perform and get through life, to protect us. And a lot of people new to IFS sometimes ask, how many parts do I have? Like if I play tennis on Tuesdays and I play tennis on Fridays, do I have Tuesday night tennis parts and Friday night tennis parts? And, that's a weird example, right? In reality, our parts are fairly generalizable, and they fall into 3 groups, 3 different functions that allow us to survive and adapt to stress, right? And each of these 3 roles can become extreme during times of suffering or stress in our system. 2 of these roles are what we call the protectors, and they are the managers and firefighters. Now, the parts that the protectors protect are typically more vulnerable, and we call these parts exiles. As the name implies, exiles get hidden away from our conscious attention. They get exiled. So now let's talk about each of these three roles or these positions that our parts can take on. Managers like to plan ahead and prevent pain, right? So when I put gas in my gas tank before running out of gas, that's the manager part of my emotional system kicking in saying, hey, right, remember when you were 17 and you actually ran out of gas like twice in the same year? How about filling up the gas tank, when it's like a quarter of a tank full? That's the manager part of me speaking. Managers are responsible, and their motto is something like, never again. They don't like losing control or being overwhelmed emotionally. And managers in your emotional system do a great job of keeping track of how you appear in the eyes of others, monitoring that self-perception and perception of others. Managers really like rules and order. It's all about predictability for the managers. But what happens, let's say, if order can't be maintained and you're overwhelmed, control is lost? Well, that's where the firefighters come in. If it's too late and we're already experiencing some form of suffering or hurt, like we've already run out of gas, right? There's already pain happening. Well, firefighters are the parts of us that leap into action within us, and they create strategies that numb us, distract us, and help us escape the flames of emotional distress and physical pain. Firefighters help us get out of danger fast. That's really what they do. Their motto might be something like, I'm the last resort. And they tend to be reactive and impulsive for this reason, very unlike managers, which are conservative and like to plan ahead and not take risk. Firefighters also tend to rub people the wrong way. Have you ever laughed uncontrollably when something really serious or dreadful is happening? Yeah, that's a firefighter. Immediate release for you, right? But it really puts people off. And by the way, firefighters tend to take our attention outside of our body. And that's not a coincidence. They often are more abstract, and they allow us to function without really paying attention to or reading the very sensitive kind of emotional cues, which could be, laden with pain and overwhelm and distress. It really just detaches you. But again, remember, firefighters kind of put out the flames, but they don't care if they piss people off. Now, finally, our exiles are the parts of us that have been shut away by the protectors. Managers and firefighters work to exile parts of our system that are in pain. And the exiles have been put away for their own protection. At least that's according to the protectors, right? To keep from flooding us, destabilizing our system. Exiles have been suppressed and rejected, and so they carry with them a sense that they don't have any value. These are parts of you that, when we witness our exiles, often they have a primitive or kind of undeveloped quality to them, which can also be very startling or off-putting, which makes us want to turn away. But they can also be childlike. They contain some of our most sensitive and creative parts of us. But often they carry the sense of sort of stuntedness, frozenness at their moment of their injury. And when we feel our exiles, we often feel exposed and vulnerable, which of course is what the protectors fear the most, and why the protectors get activated to stabilize us and keep exiles cut off from our awareness. Exiles become desperate to be seen the more they are exiled, because they're often our most sensitive and open and creative and seeking of others. But the good news is that when you have a clear understanding of the roles that your parts take on, managers, firefighters, and exiles, you can begin to grow your capacity to facilitate more flow and connection between parts of your internal system that might ordinarily not be that coordinated. They're like kind of blindly kind of turning on like an air conditioning system, trying to adjust itself, but there's no one that's setting the course. And so they can antagonize each other, right? It's like the air conditioner really and the heat turned on at the same time, right? They're doing opposite things. But when we pay attention to that process and to the function and to the experience of it, we can restore a flow and connection between those parts that is really like growing bigger as a self, as a person. In fact, that's what we refer to it as, kind of growing in self energy. Without a sort of bird's eye view that self gives us, that idea of self-leadership, our protectors would think that more protection is the way to solve problems. And that actually creates more exiles, because that's what protectors do. They exile things. And eventually the exiles can't be contained. It's like a prison that's overflowing. Eventually they get out. And some event allows an opportunity for the exiles to flood our system. And then we have an escalating kind of a loop, what we call a polarization, in which the protectors then have to get bigger, the exiles get put away more harshly each time. And I'll talk about polarizations in a moment, but I want to give you the idea of how we work with IFS using what is called the 6 Fs. And this is how to work with a part. So you can be a firefighter, could be an exile, could be a manager. The main goal when using IFS to work with any part is to unblend from that part. So to understand the concept of blending and unblending, picture that you're walking alongside a lake shore with your shoes on. And you're completely out of the water, right? And your shoes are on. But you're near the water, so you have a relationship to it. You could sit down next to the water. You could take your shoes off. You could put your feet in the water, maybe just one toe, or you could go knee deep, or you could jump in fully and immerse yourself and dive down to the bottom. Now, your mind's ability to unblend from your parts is similar. Our typical experience of emotional states of mind is to be immersed, kind of under the water and in the part. We are the feeling. You're fully in the lake. You are the water at that moment in that sense. And if you're overwhelmed by the emotional experience, flooded, you're literally underwater, right? You're blended. The brilliance of IFS is that it makes intentional use of the so-called right brain's hemisphere of imagination and ability to intentionally and skillfully dissociate from the need to fully buy into all of a part's feelings, thoughts, and beliefs. I saw a bumper sticker once that said, "Don't believe everything that you think." And I love that, because that's really what we kind of do in IFS is we're not skeptical of everything, but we see what we are feeling and thinking as an amalgamation, something that was composed, and we can be curious about it and actually decompose it and still work with that information. And the result is really interesting. Remember the lake metaphor, right? So just imagine you can sit alongside that lake and decide to go in partially and then come out. There's no need to dive to the bottom, right? You can sit alongside a part of you that you're exploring. And this is the idea of what unblending is like. It's like coming alongside a part of you, where typically you are only seeing it through that part's thoughts, feelings, and beliefs and memories. But in this sense, when you're unblended from it, you're actually using a kind of a social skill. And it really is amazing, I think, how this lays on and layers onto our understanding of how the parasympathetic nervous system works in the brain, that when we utilize our social skills, our skills of empathy and awareness for what someone else might be feeling, that's the right side of the brain. And it happens to also be part of our relaxation response. And so when we imagine parts of us like they're another person, like they're like a real being or an entity inside us, we're engaging that social skill, and it is sort of activating and toning of the vagal response, the relaxation response. So I think that's really cool. It's all about unblending. Now let's talk about how to explore a part using the 6 Fs. And this is where you're going to really get the most bang for your buck from this kind of quick start guide to IFS, right? Because the 6 Fs are famous in the IFS trainings. They serve as a useful guide for exploring your own parts and building a trusting self-to-part relationship. The first F is to find the part. How do you experience the part? Where do you find it in or around your body? If it's a thought, you focus on it and follow along with it. Number two, you focus on it. You hold your attention on it. If you're familiar with mindfulness, this will be very similar. You witness what it's like. How might you describe it, right? Try to keep other parts from interfering. And by using this sort of one at a time rule of mediating, you're holding your attention there. Number three, how do you feel towards it? This is IFS's deepest, biggest question that we use all the time. And when we ask that question, how do you feel towards the part, we're aiming for one of the 8 C words that exemplify self. Remember, compassion, curiosity, connectedness, etc. If you don't feel one of those qualities, or those self qualities, that means you're viewing the target part, the one you're trying to get to know, from the lens of another part, which is very typical. So you quickly realize that you've got multiple parts and you haven't recognized many of them before. So you ask one part to step aside and just ask it to allow you to be more open to the target part. The fourth F is befriend. You befriend. You expand the relationship you have with the part. So you ask things like, can you get closer to that part? Does it trust you? And you wait for it to respond. What would you like to say to it? So it's like building relationship, things you would say to somebody socially. Number 5, the fifth F, is to find out. So you get to know the part more. What does it want you to know? What's its job? What is its intentions when it took that job in your system? And what does it need? What does it want to show you? What would it rather be doing if it didn't have to do that job? That's a huge question. And the last one is address fears and concerns. You address all the parts' fears and concerns about what would happen if it didn't do its job. And as you're working through getting to know a part using the 6 Fs, trying to get unblended and into self, IFS has this concept called the hope merchant. And I think it's really the creativity and connection aspects of self energy. And it's really powerful. But if you've followed the 6 Fs and you've gotten to the last step, addressing fears and concerns, you might use imagination to kind of dream with the part. And you might say something like, I'm here to address these concerns you have. I hear all those fears you have. And if we work together to do this, we can find a way to let go of the job or some of the burdens that you carry as part of the job and help you find a better job. Would you be interested in doing that? And the Hope Merchant is all about tapping into the possibility that really can happen. And if you're working with a client, then at this point you become the Hope Merchant. You're the one that offers that hope. And if you're working with your own parts, you might think of this step, the Hope Merchant idea, as sort of a prayer, right? It's sort of you anchoring to your higher power, higher source of possibility to hold this dream for you until it becomes a reality. If you want to learn more about IFS, there is so much to learn, and I have so much to offer from my more than a decade using IFS, especially using IFS with couples, which gets really interesting, working on your parts with your partner present, being more aware of your parts and getting a hold of them before you focus on your partner and his or her parts. And I've developed an entire course curriculum that's based on using IFS and basic mindfulness skills that's called Mindful Marriage. And it's a 7-week live course that meets once a week and goes through a substantial curriculum that teaches the basics of mindfulness meditation, basics of going inside, right? For a lot of us, some of us that can be new, and about doing this thing called the U-turn, Y-O-U turn, which is a differentiation skill. It's an ability to focus, especially when we're in conflict, more on yourself and your parts, getting to know them using IFS skills, unblending from those parts, getting more into self, especially when we're triggered, when we're hurt and scared, being able to find that center and then lead from that center, connect, communicate with our partner from that center, not from our parts. Most often when we're in conflict, we're being taken over by our parts. Our parts, they're protective. And so they don't, have our best interests long-term in mind. They have short-term interests in mind, kind of like armies, like the military. They can do damage to relationships. And so I've, for many, many years, been doing this with couples, and finally created this curriculum. So I look forward to sharing and teaching more about IFS and all the different ways it can be used in such powerful ways it can have an impact to create more wholeness and healing in your life, in the lives of people that you're working with.